whole self. We've heard a retelling with Trevor of the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus tells about who should we love, who is worthy of and deserving of our love. We've heard words from the Apostle Paul that talk about what love looks like and all the different ways that we heard described in the highs and lows of life, that we can show love to others. We've had the opportunity to sing about love that we've received and what a wonderful community it is to be part of this morning, to be able to share with you about this love, to be a part of this loving place, and to talk specifically about those who are in need of love when it comes to housing, and often the supportive services that go into that. I'm going to begin with a prayer and then share some reflections. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Divine One. Amen. Given that I'm using the First Nations version, I also want to read the land acknowledgement that Goshen College uses that I think is helpful in this community to recognize that we are on the traditional land of the Potawatomi and Miami peoples, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. So it's in this place that we get to talk about love and what it looks like to love with our whole self. The scandal that Jesus of Nazareth tells about the parable of the Good Samaritan, as I mentioned with Trevor, that the Samaritans were the people who were looked down upon, who were bullied, who were ostracized. And that was the hook, that it wasn't the powerful, the important who showed love, but the person who was often seen as an outsider and marginalized. And so it's important for us to recognize that the people that we may look down on in today's society are not only deserving of love, but people we can look to for what it means to love others. And the reality is that we want to remember to love all of God's image bearers, no matter who we are, no matter where we live, no matter how we live, we are called to love others. And so I was trying to think about what would be the most scandalous term to use, because we don't have Samaritans in our culture and our community today. So maybe you think of the panhandler, or the Trump voter, or the Hamas supporter, or the IDF soldier, or the addicted, or the criminal. There are still people we look down upon in our society today. And the scandal of the story that Jesus tells is to lift up those people that we most maybe would look down upon, to learn about what it means to love. And so we are challenged to love with our whole self. There's a couple things from this story about the Good Samaritan that help us and challenge us to think about what love looks like, not just when it's easy and comfortable, but when it's hard. So the first point I want to make is that this love that is shown is love interrupted. That Trevor, in our example that he walked through, had to stop to be able to help someone else. We all, three of the people who passed Sarah, saw the pain and saw the wound, but only one person did something. Love means that we have to be willing to be interrupted, to change our schedules. We had one meeting this past Thursday that I emceed about housing first, and it was an interruption to take time out of an evening that could have been spent doing other things, to hear neighbors and businesses and concerned citizens' concerns, to hear fears, to hear misunderstandings and myths. And that's part of the interruption that we have to do if we want to love everyone in our community. It's not just love the people that we want to love, but love those who are resisting love those who have hesitations and fears and even misunderstandings. I'll correct one actually from Ann this morning. The city actually hasn't purchased the land yet. What's happened is the school corporation has agreed to sell the land to the city. The redevelopment commission has to decide to buy that land, and they've tabled that decision for now because they want to get more public input, which is why we had a meeting last Thursday, and we'll have another one this Tuesday, as they talked about, where we want to continue to allow our schedules to be interrupted to hear people's concerns and questions. But even if the city purchases that land, there's still a whole public process of getting it rezoned for multifamily living if we decide to go in that direction. That requires our city common council approval, and then going back to redevelopment if we're going to sell it to the group now known as New Day Intake Center, which has been running Motels for Now for the past 3+ years in our community. But these are the kind of interruptions that we have to take if we truly want to love everyone, to hear concerns, to listen to that. Who are the people that maybe will interrupt you today or maybe even this week? So you've got plans for people you want to talk to maybe at the potluck afterwards, but you may be interrupted even today with someone who needs love. Or this week as you go to work, as you shop, as you visit others, can you be prepared even now to center ourselves in our meditation time to be ready to love and be interrupted by things that are unexpected? I bicycled here today, and I often like to bicycle around town because it gives me those chances to be interrupted, to go a little bit slower, to see people who are often marginalized and overlooked, and allow my travels to be interrupted. Now, that doesn't work for all of us, but maybe we can find our own ways, the busy pace of life, to slow down, to take what we've learned here in our breathing and our centering, to be able to act that out throughout the week and allow ourselves to be interrupted wherever we may go. One of the things that we talk about is that dealing with homeless and those who are unhoused is not just a downtown problem. But if you've spent any time in this East Bank community, you know it's issues here too. With East Race Liquors right down the street, with Oaklawn providing mental health care, I often come across people who are intoxicated, passed out on the street, or looking for help. So even in this part of town, we see that need. This is not just a downtown issue. But there are opportunities even around here to allow our lives to be interrupted, to see people who are in need and to try to encourage them and support them and guide them in the right direction. Love is interrupted. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on ways that we can care for others and show support to others. The other thing that Trevor did that comes out in the story that Jesus tells is to actually care for someone. Thankfully, Sarah only needed a little brushing off and a guidance back to her seat. But in the story that Jesus tells, it's even more detailed because the Samaritan has to get the wounded traveler onto their donkey and then transport them to an inn to be able to provide not only the transportation, but then the funds for the recovery for this person who's been injured and harmed. Love is consistent, and love has a plan for recovery. Love checks in. Love plans for restoration. Love involves sacrificial giving. These are all things that come out in Housing First that we've talked about in the past, we'll talk about next week. If you're not familiar with the model, it's the idea that unlike shelters like Center for the Homeless or Hope Ministries that have requirements to be able to stay there, at Motels for Now, the former Knights Inn, we house people first. We create a high-access location where people can get housed, and then they can start to deal with the issues that they're facing, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, whether it's education or job training. By first housing people, we're able to care for them and love them, and then work on that plan for recovery, for consistency. It's not easy. If you've ever been through rehab, you know that it's very difficult and painful. The success rate is not very high. And so sometimes people fail and they have to try again. But one of the encouraging things that we see at Motels for Now is that people are taking longer and longer stays. So that when maybe someone will be there for like a week at first, the next time it's 3 weeks. And if they're still struggling at that point and they come back again, they're staying for 3 months or 4 months. The average stay for someone at the Knights Inn is 4 months. That's how long it takes to often get someone stabilized, to be able to get them the resources they need, and then move them on to housing. It's love that is consistent, that has a plan for recovery. One of the things that we try to point out is that if you look at what the county publishes about overdose deaths, we had 97 of them last year in St. Joseph County. Drugs and substance abuse is a real problem across our community. Of those, 75 happened in the city of South Bend, and 3 were at the motel. And so we know people who are struggling with addictions, but we know it's both a city and county, and it's a human problem. As we come out of this pandemic, we've seen increases in substance abuse, and we've seen lots of harmful substances added to the drug supply that make things unsafe. And it's a reality that we all face. In planning for this service with Mary Alice and Ann, they were sharing an obituary from someone who was part of a Unitarian congregation over on the East Coast. who died from overdose. And I want to read one of the things the family wrote about this woman as encouragement for anyone who's dealing with addiction. They say, if you yourself are struggling from addiction, know that every breath is a fresh start. Know that hundreds of thousands of families who have lost someone to this disease are praying and rooting for you. Know that we believe with all our hearts that you can and will make it. It is never too late. And if you're reading this obituary with judgment, educate yourself about this disease, because that is what it is. It is not a choice or a weakness. And chances are very good that someone you know is struggling with it, and that person needs and deserves your empathy and support. That is love. That is a picture of love that is consistent, that plans for recovery, that helps people even when there are weaknesses and even when there are shortcomings. As we do this type of love at Motels for Now, we see transformation. Of the 700 people who have spent some time at the Nights Inn, 78% of them have moved on to successful outcomes. That may mean going to rehab. That may be moving into a mental care facility. It may mean reuniting with family or finding friends to stay with. Or it may mean moving into private housing facilitated by Motels for Now. So of the 550 people who have had successful outcomes, we've housed about 200 of them. Then 73%, so 148 people, are now housed who weren't before, who are on the street, who are living in abandoned buildings, who are in sidewalks, down by the river. That's a tremendous success that we celebrate, what love looks like consistently, to allow our lives to be interrupted and then to plan for recovery and provide the resources that someone needs. It's a picture that we celebrate, and that we know there's still more people who are in need. But one of the encouraging things that we found is that when we are consistently showing love, when we're working with other care providers, that it makes a difference. And so Oaklawn case managers go out to the Nights Inn, and Beacon Medical staff from the hospital come out to provide care also. And different church groups and other nonprofit groups go out to serve meals and provide music and encouragement and support. It's a wonderful place of community that provides that consistency. And what happens then is that we hope to see love transforming. Because that's the one thing I would say is missing from the story that Jesus of Nazareth tells when he describes someone going from Jerusalem up to Jericho on a pilgrimage. Because what if that keeps happening? That pilgrims keep going along that road and bandits keep attacking them and beating them up and causing harm. At some point, it doesn't make sense to keep caring for people after they've been wounded and hurt again and again. But we'd want to start figuring out what can we do to address the root of that problem. Maybe it's lighting along the path. Maybe it's safety patrols. Maybe it's going with the pilgrims so they are in community and they are in support. Or maybe it's addressing larger systemic inequalities that cause people to turn to violence, to turn to harm, because they don't have the education, the employment, the opportunities that they need to contribute to society. So this is even the larger picture that we want to encourage of love that is transforming. What is encouraging about Housing First is we've been able to end chronic homelessness in the city of South Bend. When they started, there were over 60 people who'd been homeless for at least a decade, living in our community, struggling with services. When I pastored at Broadway Christian Parish, it was discouraging at first because we were feeding and clothing and showering people, but they just kept in the same cycle of poverty and trauma that they had experienced and been harmed by. But by now being able to open this low barrier shelter, we've been able to see lives transformed, to see people have hope, to carry on, to look forward to moving in and moving on to positive outcomes, seeing love transforming their lives, transforming our community. So we now have more people exiting homelessness than entering homelessness. And even with a long wait list of sometimes 6 to 9 months, we know that people won't meet that definition of chronic homelessness, of being homeless for over a year, because of the work that Motels for Now is doing, and we hope to continue with the New Day Intake Center going forward. Love in messy, uncomfortable ways brings transformation. God's love for us that is seen in Jesus of Nazareth motivates me, and Jesus' followers are called to show love back to God and those who are around us, even our enemies. Jesus models these qualities to his hearers, his questioners, his challengers, and to us. We are challenged to love with our whole selves, not only in this safe, accepting place here, but out in the world where it gets messy, where it gets difficult, where it gets confrontational sometimes. If you come on Tuesday night, you'll hear that for sure. But we're called to continue to love. Amen? Amen. Amen.